Welcome back to Is Your Liver Healthy with the Global Liver Institute. I'm your host and Vice President at GLI, Jeff McIntyre. Now, if you're someone concerned about your liver health, you know that it can be challenging to find easy, accessible, and supportive information about your liver. And if you're a patient or caregiver concerned about a rare condition, something like PBC, alpha-1, or Wilson's disease, then resources are even more scarce. And I once saw an episode of the TV medical drama House, where the eventual diagnosis was Wilson's disease. And in the TV version, they didn't have the resources, symptoms were conflated with other disorders, and specialists, of course, weren't readily available. And while the investigation of it all made for good television, too many people in the rare community know what that's about firsthand. And if you combine the challenges around rare with the challenges of those in rural settings where diagnosis, treatment, and support can be hours or in some cases days away, then that rock to push uphill just gets a lot bigger. Now, fortunately, we're getting tools, support, and better education in place. At Global Liver Institute, it's Rare Liver Disease Month, and this month on Is Your Liver Healthy, you're going to hear from those involved in rural and rare liver disease about the challenges, about the opportunities, and the experience of navigating rural healthcare and rare disorders. Let's get started. Okay, so I want to get started by going around the room with introductions. And since we're in podcast form, make sure that everybody has a voice with a name here as well. And so if you would just introduce yourself and kind of what brings you here today, who you're with, that would be appreciated. Cecilia, we'll start with you.
Hi, thanks for having me. My name is Cecilia Duenas. By profession, I'm a clinical neuropsychologist, but I'm also a PBC patient. I was diagnosed with PBC in May of 2021. This was following about 7 years, maybe a little bit more, of just ethnic disparities, health disparities, difficulty with trying to find someone to actually listen and hear to what I was experiencing. And that kind of brought me into the advocacy realm because I never wanted anyone to go through what I went through while facing those 7 years of having symptoms and elevated liver enzymes, but not getting a diagnosis. And with the advocacy realm, I started really looking into how can we represent patients' voices, patients who aren't enrolled in certain studies or patients who are rare, or the rarest of the rare like myself. I'm AMA negative, so my data will never be captured. And that led me to start my own research organization called the PBC Research Foundation. And that is why I'm here.
Excellent. Teresa, one of my favorite Southerners in the field.
Thanks, Jeff. I'm glad to be here. I am with the Mid-South Liver Alliance. We are based in Tennessee, Kentucky, Alabama, Mississippi, Arkansas, and Louisiana. We're committed to improving, educating, advocating, and supporting children, adults, and families affected by chronic liver disease in those Mid-South states. We work some with some rare diseases, but I do have a lot of rural areas that, they really don't have the physicians there that can even figure out what's going on with them. And that's the discussion that I'll have with you as far as how hard it is to get to the places they need to get to.
Excellent. Looking forward to that. Harsha.
Hi, my name is Harsha Rajasimha. I'm the founder of Indo-US Organization for Rare Diseases and Jiva Clinical Trials. My professional background is in computational biology and data science with a postdoc at NIH and FDA before I moved into industry in 2012, consulting with Big Pharma in the clinical R&D space. What brought me here is I'm also a rare dad to a child with rare disease that I lost in 2012. And that was my entree into the rare disease world, while I was already a scientist working in that area. And so opened my perspectives to the patients and families and caregivers, that what they go through. I'm also a brother to a younger one who battled diabetes, a silent killer, and we lost him in his 30s. And both these personal experiences and professional experiences led me on a mission to make clinical trials more accessible universally and make it easy for non-English speakers as well as people living in rural areas to have the same opportunity that metropolitan dwellers have. Pleasure to be here.
Awesome. Let's bring it home with our own Kristen Hatcher.
Nice to meet you guys. I'm Kristen Hatcher. I'm the Pediatric and Rare Program Director at GLI. But at the age of 43 years old, I'm the oldest living Alpha 1 patient in my family. I come from the Appalachian Mountains, where if you look at the Alpha 1 Foundation's poster, about 30% of us come from that super rural area. And I'm very excited to talk about the rural population that I feel has been left out.
Awesome. Let's kick off with talking about the rural issues. They're they present certain challenges and perhaps some opportunities. Teresa, as executive director of the Mid-South Liver Alliance, you work with, well, frankly, some of the most rural states and those with, frankly, some of the worst health outcomes across the board. What would be a challenge for care that a patient in your rural areas, that in your region might face? For instance, are clinical trials an issue or even considered?
Clinical trials in some areas possibility, but they're few and far between. The biggest issue in my area is, where are the hepatologists? And your hepatologists in most of the states are where the transplant centers are. If a state only has one transplant center, like Alabama, and it's in the northern part of the state, it's an 8-month waiting list to get in to see a hepatologist. So that can be a problem. In Mississippi, there's 2 hepatologists in the whole state. So that's a problem. There's a lot of that going around in a lot of my states. And even in Nashville, I think it's like a 3 to 4 month wait to see a hepatologist now. I know, and I was talking in Kentucky this week, and they were saying it was probably a 6 to 8 month wait. So there's a lot of issues with that. That's kind of seems to be the top one. As far as the clinical trials, a lot of them are being done at the bigger centers. So the rural people really are kind of left out of them, unless they somehow have some kind of connection with a hepatologist at that location and can get into it.
So we've been talking a lot internally about the notion of trust with patients, and I feel like trust issues supersede geographic destination. It just supersedes urban or rural or kind of wherever you are. But I do feel like there are trust issues that are kind of specific challenges that are specific to rural regions, if you will. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about kind of what strategies and activities you use to build a foundation of knowledge, if you will, and to kind of build trust with rural populations so they can seek care.
Well, there are a lot of trust issues. I am from East Tennessee, yet if I go in the upper part of East Tennessee and try to talk with people, I am not from the upper east part, and they won't talk to me. So it's like you've got to get out there and build that trust in doing different things. And some of the things that we're kind of starting to do, one thing is we're actually starting an echo program. And we're working with GLI on that for Massilled and MASH. And we're trying to echo what an echo program is, for those that may not know. It's the extension of community healthcare outcomes. And in the rural areas, without having the specialty doctors, this is a way to get them to a meeting and have the PCPs or the nurse practitioners, GIs or PAs, whoever's handling the patients, to be a part of that and kind of share some of their cases and problems that they've had and kind of help them to talk through what can be done for that patient. It's a program that will help improve the access to specialty care in underserved areas by providing clinicians and the knowledge of support that they need to manage complex conditions. And the thing about us doing it, instead of each individual transplant center trying to do one, we're doing it as a joint effort. So they don't feel like we're there to take over their patients. It's more of an educational thing, and it's more of a community effort in building that community feeling to make sure that we're all working together to help the patient to the best of their ability. Another program we do that kind of helps us to build the trust in the rural areas is our liver patient summits. We started those last year. We did one in Memphis, Nashville, and Birmingham. Each time we did it, we kept expanding the number of people that came. And especially in Birmingham, we had a lot of the people come from the rural areas. So I think that as we continue to do programs like that and get our name out there and get our word out there and get patients sharing the story of working with us and getting us kind of through the narrow thing that we need to get through to get trust built, I think we're going to see that that's going to help too. And I'm excited because we're already actually starting to work on some liver patient summits for this year. Our first one will be in Louisville, Kentucky, April the 5th.
Excellent. Excellent. That I was not aware of that. That's great news to hear.
Yeah.
Cecilia, you've got both patient and advocate hats to wear here, and you've become an advocate and you founded the PBC Research Foundation. I'm wondering, why is the rural population important to you in this context?
The rural population is really important to me because they're not captured in the data that we're seeing in clinical trials, or they're not captured in the data that we're seeing when industry is looking at patient information and data. And the reason is these rural patients, as Teresa was saying, may sometimes have to fly for care or drive for care. And they're driving hours and hours. And so joining these clinical trials is going to be really, really hard for them. In my particular area, even though I'm not fully rural, there are barriers with language, or like we were talking about, trust, in that if a clinical trial is in an affluent part of San Diego County, our East County patients aren't going to want to travel there because they're looked down on, or they're going to feel like they're looked down upon. And so with my research foundation, making sure that we are capturing the voice of not just patients who are already enrolled in clinical trials or already enrolled in databases that maybe industry or regulatory individuals are conducting. With that, with our patient registry, we're able to actually access patients because I am a patient. And so we have that trust. We have the language that I also speak, a different language. I speak Spanish as well. And so I'm able to kind of connect with those patients who aren't being captured in essentially the PBC landscape that we typically see, because they're not in those areas. They're not able to drive. They're not in those trials. And so what's unique to a patient advocacy group running their own patient database is that we're in the setting, we're in the actual conferences, and we're taking our registration aspect there, and we're taking patients who are already in these conferences and registering them, collecting their data, collecting the biospecimens while they're already there, learning more about PBC or about their particular liver disease so that they don't have to travel. Or we're sending kits and specimen collection samples to their home, again, so they don't have to travel. So we're making that accessibility really easy for them. And because we are a patient advocacy group run by myself, who is a PBC patient, that connection of, hey, this is someone who understands what it's like to live as a patient, someone who is a patient, and someone who has my best interest in mind, and understands that it's important for me to own my own data. I don't want my data collected and then being sold or shared without my permission, or looked at by people who may not have my best interest in mind. And so in collecting those rural patients' data, we're able to say, hey, you know what? Not only are you participating in advancing the field of PBC, not only are we coming to you or sending kits to you so you don't have to travel, but you're also the owner of your data. You're able to follow your data. You're able to see what difference and impact you're making and have a voice, so that when we come to the table with regulatory individuals, you're able to be represented in the population of PBC.
It's awesome. So Harsha, you shared a little bit in your introduction about your entry point into rare diseases and the work that you do, and a little bit about the impact that made in terms of what you wanted to do with your career, how you spend your days. I'm wondering, what are the challenges you see in participation in clinical research, especially, and you're in a unique position with Indo-US to kind of compare and contrast India and the United States, especially as two countries with sizable rural populations. What do you see the similarities are there?
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. I think it's very interesting, right? So, two very different nations, both very diverse in its population in terms of every religion, race, ethnicity represented. India has even more complexity in terms of languages and the 28 official languages, but a lot more languages. And I think that was mentioned even in rural parts of United States or even urban parts. I think in around LA or New York, we have pretty much every language in the world represented in that metro cities. And that, we have heard this from Children's Hospital LA, that they have parents that speak pretty much every language there is in the world. I think there is a lot of similarities when it comes to the core challenges that most countries face. Even in one of the advanced countries like the United States, we still have about 18% of people without access to stable internet connection. And that adds to the challenge of digital patient engagement in engaging them through telehealth and remote patient engagement. And so I view this two major pillars, right? One is the trust building, absolutely, in rare disease in particular. Patient advocacy groups have a huge role to play in building the trust. It's all parents, families, and affected members who come together, which naturally generates trust among the collaborating members. And two, it's technological innovation, the digital health revolution, the AI revolution. These both are very critical components of addressing the. We all know the problems, right? Like why clinical trials are still conducted mostly in academic medical centers and in metropolitan cities, leaving 70% of India is still rural. And it's probably similar number in United States, although it's densely populated in metropolitan cities. A large number of people live in rural and Midwest and other parts of hard to reach geographies, as they say. And we have 95% of cancer patients, for example. Unlike liver disease, cancer is a lot more investments and a lot more clinical trials. Even there, 95% of cancer patients have never been asked if they want to participate in a clinical trial. And that only tells us how much more severe it is for liver patients.
Yeah, it's so interesting, isn't it, that, even something you wouldn't normally think that broadband access would be something that we'd be talking about in the liver health space, but it's so important, isn't it? It just is such the foundation, and especially in dealing with rural healthcare issues. So that brings us into Kristen. You're Global Liver's Director for Pediatric and Rare Liver Diseases, and those that know you, as you said, you're also an Alpha-1 patient. I want to talk a little bit about your diagnosis, and if you're willing, and the obstacles you've encountered living in a rural area. What is the situation today, and how do you get the care that you need?
Well, at 43, I am the oldest person in the upper East Tennessee region. So, to Teresa's point, it's very different geographically. According to NPR, I'm literally going to be the last generation with this accent. We've been so isolated. Very small trust of government, very of course bordering the Cherokee Nation, and then not a really big trust in modern medicine. I want to point out something about my family, and I'm just going to say this: most Americans, about 60% of us, read below a sixth grade level, and that's just a fact. And that does not mean that we are not smart. It does not mean that we are not as deserving of information as other folks that are a little bit more well read. But that's my family. And that's why I am the oldest living person in my family with this disease, because my father, who was a police officer, is not going to ask a 24-year-old resident to decipher a paragraph for him. You need a little dignity. And that's what I feel like is missing largely in the clinical trial space is dignity for rural patients. I don't want to carry my my poop in a cup across the state. It's 3.5 hours from here to Nashville. And if you ask me to do that in a clinical trial, will I do it? I mean, well, yeah, it's going to save my life, but I'm privileged. That being said, I've never been offered a clinical trial either. I came from Combined Brain, I've been in the research and development space in the rare diseases for I mean, going on a decade. And with all of my privilege, I still don't have access either. So I can't imagine what that looks like for folks who aren't Kristen, quite frankly.
If I can chime in here, Jeff, and say that despite being one among the more educated with a PhD, I found myself very limited when it came to finding a clinical trial for my mother-in-law for a dry AMD clinical trial in the Washington, D.C. metro area. We went through the clinicaltrials.gov portal to search for clinical trials, and we identified maybe 13 trials within 20-mile radius of where we live in the suburbs of Washington, D.C. And that's how far I could go. And then going from those 13 dry AMD interventional clinical trials to finding that one trial, even I could not figure it out, even with a PhD in computational biology. It will take an ophthalmologist, a clinician who understands the clinical jargon and language to, and all in English, of course, but it takes a lot of specialization to understand and match a patient to a trial, which only clinicians can do with the current clinicaltrials.gov portal.
These panel conversations, I feel like we could have filled the show with just one of you, frankly, as well, to pick your brains and to talk about the experiences and where we can learn. So I'm going to try to be equal time here. And I got 2 round robin questions that I want to go around with everybody with here. And in our first round robin, we'll just go the same way that we went previously as well. So Teresa, I'll be starting with you on this. From your experiences, I think the question is, what have you learned that all patients, no matter who they are or where they live, where they could participate in support of clinical care? Are there tools or strategies that have been particularly helpful? And I think with the panel here, what I look for is, give me one. Let's see if we can do this. And so is there a strategy in your experience, maybe not the best, maybe not the easiest, maybe not the most cost effective, but maybe it is? What's something that pops in your mind about something that could help patients participate in effective clinical care? And Teresa, as I said, lead the charge.
I at this point, I know that, I came from the renal world and I had to help with that a lot too. And the biggest barrier I think that we always had was transportation and getting people from like East Tennessee to Middle Tennessee if they were coming to Vanderbilt for transplant or whatever. And I think that's true in all of the rural areas, getting that transportation issue, especially with the gas prices. When they go up, nobody's going to go anywhere. And they can't afford to go anywhere because it really hits them really hard. So to me, transportation is probably one of the biggest ones. That's probably the one I would go with.
Okay. Cecilia, give me a tool or strategy that's been particularly helpful. Where would you land?
I mean, for me, it's, as someone who who has English as a second language, accessibility with language, but not just translating the clinical documents or the consent forms into the language, but bringing it down to a level where the average, like as Kristen was saying, 6th grade reading level, in my culture, that is not true. We are much lower reading level than that. So bringing the language and different regions of languages to the patients at a rate that they can understand. So, not just a reading level, but just even different clinical words, making it understandable so that when they're reading these documents or someone is reading it to them, they don't have to question every single sentence on what does this mean? What is this clinical term? Does this mean I'm selling my specimens? Does this mean I'm selling my data? Making it very, very, very basic and easy to understand, not just their native language, but the region in which they come from. If you take Spanish and you translate it to Castilian Spanish, me, myself, with Spanish being my first language, I'm not going to understand it. I'm not going to understand what they're asking of me because my region is from, west part of Mexico, which is very different than east northern part of Mexico. And so just those nuances would make it a lot easier for patients in accessibility.
This is so interesting. Harsha, I'm curious, let's go to you next. What's your one tool strategy that you think you would suggest as being particularly helpful?
Yeah, I think flexibility with reduced burden for patients to participate in clinical trials from the comfort of their home, wherever they live, with reduced travel or even avoid travel wherever possible. So it fits into my lifestyle, right? And patients want options where they don't want to be treated like a subject, where they have to show up at a specified time at a specified location and go through a protocol process like as if they have committed a crime, instead, if it fits into my day-to-day real world, what we call pragmatic clinical trials now, right? So which fits in the real world. I'm just wearing the same clothes. I'm not getting in a hospital gown.
Right.
I'm just wearing my devices and going about my day-to-day, and data is being captured. I think that's basically one thing that I would pick.
It's so interesting because we've got, transportation, language, and data, which are traditionally not thought of as healthcare issues, as well. And Kristen, we're going to come to you. Often the person that goes last feels like all the good choices have been taken, but I know you've got a million and one opinions on this. Throw us a strategy, a tool. What would you highlight as something that could be helpful for patients?
Well, something I've always heard is death with dignity, and I'm going to replace that with drugs with dignity. And that dignity, giving people their dignity, means everything we've just spoken about, not having to ask to be on the same playing field. And that's beyond dignity, that's equity. And making sure that Kristen Hatcher's papa in Upper East Tennessee has the exact same access to clinical trials as someone that's college educated at Vanderbilt. Speaking with me in the language that I understand and giving me the dignity to be on your level instead of being beneath you is going to not only get me to participate, but it's going to make me spread the word out organically like, hey, this isn't scary. This isn't bad. And I'm going to guarantee you, not a lot of folks have heard genomics, whole exome sequencing, or alpha 1 in this voice. But yet 30% of patients with alpha 1 sound like me and look like me.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. That is the wrap up for us. And I want to give you a chance to talk and spread the good news and the good word about the work that you do. So, Teresa, for more information on the Mid-South Liver Alliance, where do people go? Can they find you online? What do you have coming up?
The next thing we have coming up is a patient meeting that we're going to be holding up in Louisville, Louisville, Kentucky on April the 5th. And they can find things hopefully on my website regarding that within a couple of weeks. And it's midsouthliveralliance.org.
Awesome. Cecilia, you mentioned about the nonprofit that you've just started. Talk a little bit about where we can find more information on that.
So we are completely new kids on the block, but it is the pbcresearchfoundation.org. We do have our mission and vision and a couple of informational pages already up and launched. So they can definitely find more information there, but we will be making social media announcements as soon as we're ready to start recruiting.
Awesome. And Harsha, Indo-US Rare, also the Indo-US Organization for Rare Diseases, if I have that correct. Where can people go to find more information about frankly, the really cool work you're doing there?
Thank you. Yeah, it's indousrare.org is the website. And we have a annual Bridging Rare Summit coming up, which alternates each year between United States and India. This year, it'll be November 3rd and 4th at George Mason University at the Hilton Performing Arts Center here in Manassas, Virginia. So invite everyone to get involved. And the easiest way to find me is on LinkedIn. So thank you.
Excellent. Yeah, that's a great space as well. Good to hear. Kristen, I'll let you say kind of where to find you, but people know where to find you at Global Liver, and you're going to be joining us in our wrap up coming up next as well. So for Global Liver, rare liver stuff, where should folks go?
Well, the Global Liver Institute, naturally. Globalliver.org. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and definitely LinkedIn. A lot of cool stuff is going on here lately. So I really do encourage you to sign up for our newsletters because we don't just talk about the global liver space. We also amplify the patient's voice and the patient advocacy voice. If you have anything that you want to add, send it our way. We'd be happy to have it. And on a Like my last note, I just found out I'm gonna be spending my birthday with you this year, Harsha. November 2nd. Okay, awesome. I'll see you.
All right, we are back. And for those listening via podcast, I'm joined again by GLI's Director of Pediatric and Rare Liver Disease, Kristen Hatcher, and by producer extraordinaire, Lily Pennick, for our kind of our post-game breakdown, I guess, as well. It was a really interesting conversation we just had. It's a day later, so we've had a little bit of time to process this a little bit. I was really taken by, in that conversation that we came to these conclusions, these 4 points of transportation, data, language, and dignity. Kristen, you raising dignity there at the end as being important. And it really occurs to me that when we deal with kind of the patient journey, so often we're pitted against each other, fighting for kind of the scarce resources. But these are really, universal issues that we can all collaborate around and work together with. So, Kristen, I'm super curious about your thoughts as someone who's in this day to day. This combination of rural and rare, which so well personally, it can be such a double whammy. What were your takeaways from the conversation today?
Well, honestly, my takeaways for the conversation came from Dr. Harsha. In America, we do tend to see ourselves insulated in the quote unquote rural populations. But as you see, rural isn't just, farmland and cows. Rural can be rural India, rural can be rural China. It's rural is everywhere. So that was my huge takeaway is not only are we a lot less rural and rare than I thought, like, wow, there are so many of us across the world.
Yeah, and I would dare say it's probably more dominant than urban in many ways. And so I'm really curious to kind of see what we can learn from those experiences. What are they doing in India? What are they doing in sub-Saharan Africa? What are they doing in Southeast Asia that might play to Ecuador, that might play to Kansas, that might play to other areas as well? Yeah, and as we discuss that, Lily, we're kind of beginning to talk, in public health language,
I love it.
which is you bring some background in the public health, kind of that population level insight as well. What are some of the issues in this rare and rural conversation that resonate for you?
I think the first thing that strikes me is for rare and rural communities, kind of by their nature, the typical rules of public health don't apply, right? You're thinking about the most good for the most people, but when to apply that fairly, you have to include people that are structurally, culturally, geographically hard to reach. I think it was interesting to me. The conversation that we had really aligns with the direction and the global ethics about clinical research. Just last year, the World Medical Assembly updated the Declaration of Helsinki, which has kind of been the cornerstone of standards for clinical trials for many decades. And this updated version included changes to data privacy and consent. It included language to better give respect and dignity to participants, no longer research subjects, and an emphasis on historically underrepresented groups, which rural communities both are and contain. Same for rare. So I think we're aligned with the direction that the world is going, but it seems like the liver community is almost ahead of the curve, and that we're already working on these things that have just been coming out.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, it really does speak to what can we learn, with the joint experiences from, international rural communities and how that may translate down as well. And I'm familiar with that with other like non-communicable diseases or even communicable diseases. We've learned a lot from like sub-Saharan Africa and how they engage and deal with malaria, for instance, and that sort of thing as well. Kristen, I'll go to you for any last thoughts that you might have.
I would love to see all of the patients apply for our A3. When I think of equity, A3 definitely tops my mind because here at GLI, when we talked about, some of those barriers that got brought up, Jeff, like transportation, GLI brings patients to Washington, D.C. No matter where, if you're from rural Mississippi, I saw some folks from across the pond at our A3 this year. we provide a place, an equitable place for rural patients to come together and for the very first time maybe see and talk to the folks that make the decisions about our life. And it's such a powerful experience. And that's really where the rare and rural stemmed from, was in equity. And I saw that GLI was already ahead of the curve in that one again, and overcoming inequities by providing those scholarships to patients.
Excellent. Okay, thank you, ladies. Let's do a little bit of business here at the end. We keep on rolling with yet another episode of Is Your Liver Healthy? I want to give another shout out and thanks to Teresa, Cecilia, Harsha, and Kristen for joining us today. Special shout out to Kristen again for joining Lily and me for our breakdown after the conversation. Make sure you catch up with all the latest activities and actions during Rare Liver Disease Month at globalliver.org, and be sure to join the conversation at our socials on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Now, you're going to see a video version of this on YouTube, but we're also going to be available on the latest podcast platforms at Spotify, Apple Pod, Pandora, or wherever you happen to be listening. Do you have a question, maybe a suggestion or an idea for a topic for a future episode? We would love to hear from you. Hit us up at healthyliver@globalliver.org. And be sure to leave a comment, like, and subscribe on your platform of choice so you don't miss any of the great upcoming episodes and great conversations. And now, it really may not seem like much, but this kind of hacks the algorithm. It helps us grow awareness, education, and support for liver patients worldwide. I'm Jeff McIntyre on behalf of Kristen, Lily, and the team at the Global Liver Institute. We'll see you next time. Thanks, y'all.